Hello and welcome to today's TDSB's Continuing Education Summer Webinar Series for parents and caregivers. Today is session number 1 in a 3-part series presentation, and the focus is on reading, how to engage your child in reading in the home. This webinar is being recorded, but it will not feature any images, names, or audio of the attendees. We are asking that you please let us know the grade, the school grade of your child by briefly going to https://bit.ly/capital letters TDSB READ. That's TDSB read. So if you can go to that bit.ly link very briefly, it's a 1-question survey that will allow the presenters, today's panelists, to know what grade your child is in. Thank you. We would like to begin with the TDSB's land acknowledgement. Before we listen to the text of the land acknowledgement, we would ask everyone to please take some time to reflect on the rich history of Indigenous contributions and legacies that are an integral part of what has become known to many as the City of Toronto. The TDSB's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit. At this time, Ms. Rogine Reed, today's webinar moderator and the Vice Principal at TDSB's Afrocentric Alternative School, will continue with the introductions.
Before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I'd like to thank Superintendent Peter Chang of Continuing Education and Norbert Costa, Principal of Continuing Education, for providing this platform for this webinar and thanking them for their support. I'd also like to thank Sean Spencer for his leadership with organizing this webinar, the technology, the surveys, the invitations, and also thank you to his team, Emmanuel Peter, Hager, and Jason, for their support, and you will be hearing from them throughout the chat. And also thank you for Alex Vesia, Marketing and Communications Officer, for advertising and his support with technology as well. I'd also like to acknowledge Ian Allison, Superintendent for Virtual School, for his guidance, and Principal Lauren Saroff for his guidance in the early stage of developing this webinar. He and his principal colleague, Allison, who is now a superintendent, did a similar workshop for parents in their network, and it was very successful, and I want to acknowledge that success. It's created the pathway for this webinar with continuing education. Parents and caregivers, thank you for coming out today to support your child's reading. We are all happy to be working with you in partnership so your child can be successful. At this time, I am going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to do it in alphabetical order by last name. So we will start with Janice Chisholm, who is a vice principal with the Toronto District School Board. She's formerly an early reading coach and an instructional leader with model schools. I would also like to introduce Kenesha Cox. She is an Ontario certified teacher, and she's the founding director of the Reading Partnership, a Toronto-based charity that focuses on promoting and improving literacy in under-resourced communities. And I would also like to introduce Dagny Gagner. Dagny is deeply committed to bringing families, professionals, and communities together to support students. She strongly believes in demonstrating love and respect for children and families by intentionally building off their joys and brilliance to inform learning opportunities. And Dagny is passionate about literacy as essential to liberation, and she's also currently a vice principal. And also, and finally, I'd like to introduce Dexter Morris. He is currently a vice principal with the Toronto District School Board, and he was also formerly an early reading coach for the board. And that is it. So we gathered your questions, and based on the questions, we are going to answer some of your questions. The Q&A will be monitored by Hagar, Emmanuel, and Sean, as well as Jason, and we will have time to also get your Q&A live. Also, I think I did thank Alex, but I just want to make sure that I introduce Alex. Is he here? Can you do a wave and say hello? Well, I see him. All right. Did you want to jump in, Sean?
Yeah, sorry, just we forgot to introduce Mr. Alex Vesia, who is the Communications Officer at the Toronto District School Board. Welcome, Alex.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, okay, so the first question will be to Dagny, and panelists feel free to jump in. It's going to be very organic. And here is the first question. How can I motivate my child to read? How to make it fun? How do I make it fun as a parent?
Great, thank you. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay. That's a great question. So I think probably my biggest piece of advice around motivating children to read and having fun with reading is to keep that fun in mind whenever we're doing the reading, first and foremost. And then I would say that if your child has an interest, whatever kind of interest, that's probably one of the best places to start. So rather than, what kind of book does it have to be? What does my child like? What do they enjoy? What will bring them pleasure and joy as a reader and a positive experience? So always my best advice as a parent, as an educator, is to try to use things to read. It might be books, it might be something we look up on the computer, it could be a recipe, it could be song lyrics, it could be talking about, hey, I have this show and there's this book version of it, and comparing. So anything that might spark their interest based on things that they love or find joy in. The other thing is I would look for opportunities to make reading fun, where I can read in kind of a less formal way. So if there are times where you're doing something as a parent, if you can ask your child to join in, hey, could you read me this word right here? Those kind of things are really helpful. And obviously, depending on the age and how comfortable a reader your child is. The other thing I would say is probably trying to choose books that are relatable. So we find that many young readers of all different ages really like characters that may reflect them, something about them as a person. So where do they see themselves in the text? See things they love, see things they value, see people who look like them, maybe use words that talk like them. So there are sometimes books that have other languages blended in. Things like that can sometimes be encouraging. And the other thing I would say is that as a parent, no matter how old our child is, sometimes a really motivating and kind of fun, shake it up thing is to read with your child. So the more you can read aloud to your child, you can read with them, you can show them you doing reading and create kind of organic or natural opportunities to do reading together. And if you have the time and space, build in a time, those can be really motivating ways to read. And at that, I will see if there's anyone else who'd like to add on.
So there's there's many things I took away. There's two things that lead into another question. You talked about no matter what age, how to make it fun, but is there different reading strategies for different ages? Dexter or Janice?
So I think the easiest way to answer that is not really, in the sense that, the strategies that they used from when they were like, an early literacy, whether it be kindergarten, grade 1, so on, compared to middle school, it's the same strategies. It just might look different. So we always want to make sure that they're reading and they're understanding what they're reading, right? So that comprehension, you have to understand in kindergarten, you have to understand in grade 8. So the key is, really, I wanted to highlight the importance of oral language. So talking, having discussions around what we read, what we're going to read, what we understood from what we read, what we would change or do differently. Not forgetting the way what we say, if we can speak it, we can write it. If we can write it, we can read it. So also having your child understand and see the connection between reading and writing. They're reciprocal, they go together, and oral language connects both of them. So just making sure, again, the biggest piece I would say to answer that question is that, yes, it will look different depending on the level that they're reading and the age range that they're in, but the same key concepts of reading for meaning and for fun and enjoyment can happen from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 and beyond. I don't know if Janice or anyone else wants to jump in.
The only thing I'll add to that is when you're thinking about reading strategies, you may want to go through the book with the child first. So sometimes the book may be one that is slightly too challenging for the child, or it may be really easy. And there's no rule of thumb that says the child always have to be reading a book that's easy for them. So if it is a book, like we've had that situation where they pick a book and say, I want to read this. And the first thing you want to say is, no, how about you pick something else? And what I would say is, back to Dagny's question with the motivation piece, you don't want to say no. So what I would do in that situation in terms of a reading strategy is go through the book with the child. So look at the cover, look at the pictures, and sort of we call it a picture walk in our teacher terms. So you walk through each page and you look at the pictures and you talk about what you're seeing. And that's a really big strategy that you can use to support children when they pick books that may not seem to be the right fit for them, but you don't want to discourage them from reading.
Thank you, Janice, Dexter, and Dagny. Dagny, you also talked about making the text relatable, and we did have a question about choosing books that culturally reflect their background. Kamisha, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, and I actually wanted to build off of what Janice was saying as well about that time spent reading with your child. What a great way to bond. Oftentimes we think when we're reading with our child, it might be your primary age children, but it's really something that you can do with your child no matter the age, right? You can make it a book club. So you have if your child's in grade 7, get enough copies of the book so that you can have one and they can have one from the library. These are things that you can borrow from the library. Everyone can be reading at the same time, and it's an opportunity for family bonding. And that's a great way to get kids excited about reading. If they know that by reading, they're spending more time, more quality time with you, that's a big a big encouragement and a way to get them excited. In terms of you know, finding materials that reflect the reader, and I think that that's something that's extremely important. Children need to see themselves reflected in the books that they're reading, and you know, we know that this is often a challenge. You know, starting in kindergarten, you know, the books that are often sent home, you know, kids will see more animals in books than they do actual racialized characters. And I know that there's a lot of work being done to address that and fill the gap. I know that's one of the things that at the Reading Partnership we really focus on, is developing books that reflect the communities that we hope to serve. But you know, if you're looking for books at the Toronto Public Library, there are resources and usually lists of books with diverse characters. These are things that you can talk to your local librarian about. If you're looking to order books online, Scholastic and Indigo, they have collections of diverse books that you can tap into as well. And so that's really a way to kind of find resources in books that reflect the kids. Yeah.
Could I jump in on here? So I'd love to add to some of the things. So I think we also really talk about the importance of window and mirror text, right? So window text, you know, text where your child is seeing the world from seeing different representations and perspectives that don't necessarily are not ours or are not themselves. And then mirror text are texts that they see, you know, their identity, they see things that relate to them and who they are, and it affirms their identity and their views of themselves. I think that it's very powerful when we have both types of text, and not just having the text, but it's the conversations that you have about the text before and after, which are it's absolutely critical and crucial. And one other thing, and we may get to this at some point, but I think it's a good time to say it as well, is I truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child, and we're all a part of it, the school and home. So really having that relationship and that connection and asking questions within your school's teacher, your administration, ask questions about the resources or the books, or what are the books that my child is reading, how can I support at home, or these are some of the texts that my child is reading at home, and we would love to see how it can connect with what's happening in school. So just that whole connection piece and collaboration between school and home, I think will help support you at home, but it will also help support us at school.
Rogine, can I just jump in for 1 second just to remind the attendees that we do have a Q&A. So if you do have any questions for the panelists, please type your questions in and we'll make sure that it gets to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Janice, I'm going to ask you this question. How do I know if a book is too easy or difficult for my child?
So again, I always go back to the teacher talks. I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible. It's the 5-finger rule. So when you think about the 5 fingers, if you're reading the first page in the book, if the child does not understand 5 words or more, you abandon it. So you say, okay, this is too challenging. That is not a just right book. Or like I suggested earlier, you read with the child. If it's, let's say, maybe 3 to 4 words that the child has encountered that they don't necessarily know, you can keep going, try the second page, and then perhaps they've picked up momentum and is really able to read it. I would say if there's about 3 words that the child doesn't know, they may still continue, but they'll need your support. And then if there are perhaps 1 or 2 words that they don't understand, then that's a just right book. Think about us as adults when we're reading and we come to a page and we find that 1 or 2 words where we think, yeah, I haven't seen this word in a while, or, oh, wait, what does that mean? But the book is still okay for us to read, but we're still learning our vocabulary, developing our vocabulary as well. So I would say just right, about 1 to 2 words, no more than 2, though that's challenging, would be just right. 3 to 4 means that the child needs support. Anything 5 and greater, too challenging, abandon or read it to the child.
Can I add something on there, Roisin? And so, and thanks, Janice. I love that rule because it helps me remember too when I'm reading, because I have, my hand to reference. So it's really helpful. And the one thing I wanted to add too is connecting back to what Dexter and other people were saying about the conversation piece. So if you do find that the book is in that 3 or 4 words and maybe the reader needs support, or 5, this maybe isn't a book that my child can read by themselves, in that we read together, there's that opportunity for the talking and that building of the understanding. And some things that you could do if you want to have the reader join in. I have a very young child at home, and right now is, can you find a word that has the letter of your name at the starting, or things like that, that bring them in as a proud reader and allow them to do some of the navigating of the print, but in a way that helps them find the success, and the rest of the time I read on as the parent, because the book is too challenging for this person who doesn't yet read all those words.
We also have a question. It was about where to find the books, I think. They're asking where to get the books. I think that was answered previously, but if we can just let people know where they can find the books.
So right now, in terms of where to find the books, we highly recommend the Toronto Public Library, getting a library card and being able to borrow books virtually, or hopefully once things start opening up, you can go to the library again. And as well, the TDSB has a fantastic virtual library with many different other resources available on there. So you would have to go to I Googled it earlier, TDSB Virtual Library, and there's a parent button just to the left, and then it takes you to a wide world of different resources for various age levels. So I would start with the Toronto Public Library. I would also start with the TDSB Virtual Library. In terms of apps, we don't really have a specific app to recommend because a lot of them do require in-app purchases, but I'll put it out to the group to see if perhaps anyone does know of a free app that we can start with.
This is not a recommendation for a free app, but just building on what you were saying about the Toronto Public Library. There's also, the Toronto Public Library also has Dial a Story. And that's a number, and I'll find it and post it in the chat, but you can dial and your child can listen to a story being read to them, and they're in several different languages. So that's a resource. So if you're too tired and you just really want to pass off that responsibility for one night, then you can just hand them the phone and dial a story and connect that way. And then I will also say that the National Film Board has really great animated stories online. And there's there's a full series on there. So that's a great resource as well, the National Film Board. And then, as I mentioned already, Scholastic and Indigo, they have, top picks and recommendations for books for readers in specific ages, and so they make it really easy and accessible for parents.
There's one more I want to add, because in the questions they asked about French books, and storybookcanada.com has a lot of different books at different levels, as well as available in French.
And if I could add too, that on our TDSB virtual library, we do have texts available in French and English, a small selection of texts in some other languages as well. And the great thing also, kind of related to Kamisha's point about the dial-a-book, is some of the virtual library apps that we have, or the program that you go into to get books from, can also read the books aloud. It has an audio function, usually on the bottom of the screen, that you can turn on, which also can support a reader to be able to hear a story and not necessarily have to be relying on reading the print with their eyes. And one thing I would add too with the with the public library is that right now they have a thing on that's been during the pandemic where you can get grab bags from there that are grouped by kind of an age. And they've put together a diverse selection of books. So if you're looking for some new texts and you're not really sure what kind of books you're interested in, or you want to check out some new ones, they have some like that. And you can even ask them to build a grab bag. So if you want books about a certain topic, or books about certain identities, or you want certain people to be shown in them, you can also ask the librarians at Public Library to help with that.
We have a few questions here in the Q&A. So the first question I think is asking, is Libby free? Is it on a free app? Yeah?
Can you repeat the question again, Hagar?
Yeah, so I think Nilofar was asking if Libby is a free app. Is it offered for free?
I'm not aware. I don't know if anyone else knows if it's a free app. And just a reminder, we are not mentioning names of participants.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Okay, and then we have another question, and they asked if my child does not want to read books at all, what do I do to motivate them?
So to just add on to that question, there were also a few questions that gendered the question. So my son doesn't read, or how do I get boys to read? And my daughter doesn't read. So I'm going to ask Dexter, it's going in order. Do you think there's a difference in how boys and girls read, if we're going to use gender? And also the question that Hagar asked.
I think it's a really good question. I think that not necessarily. What I would say is, and I just think back to myself as a student, I didn't love reading. It wasn't something that that I was passionate about or had interest in. But it wasn't until I became older that I realized that I read a lot, but I just didn't like reading what was presented to me. Right? It was so formalized, and I loved writing. So that's why I try to highlight the connection between the two. So a lot of boys, not all, but a lot of boys, the books that we have that are usually accessible to them historically doesn't always spark or keep their interest. So really, really making reading not a chore, not something that you have to do. Now you have to sit down and read. You need to do, like, really, really slowing it down, pulling back, and finding texts and resources that are their interest based. So I was probably like this, what would be a stereotypical boy growing up. I was very much into sports. I was on all the sports teams and things of that nature. So I read and always read things related to that. So if that is your child, or your child has something specific that they're passionate about and is always immersed in, and you always got to tell them to turn this off or to stop that or come from doing whatever it is, those are the things that you should try to find things from the library or from the school to have them reading about their favorite whatever it is. Their whatever is their favorite, let them read things around that. Let them write things around that too, because they can read back some of their writing, right? So I think regardless of gender, it's really about giving and exposing them to opportunities to read and for enjoyment, things that are of passion to them, things that they're interested in and about, so that they're connected to it and it's not a chore, but it's something positive and it's a good experience for them.
And just building on what you said, Dexter, because you made the reference to sports, it doesn't always have to be a book from the library. It could be the sports section in the newspaper. So just thinking about the things that you might have access to from home. It could be the newspaper, the sports section. If your child is into cooking, it could be them reading recipes or finding recipes online, and then talking about the ingredients and perhaps then making making whatever it is that they found. So it goes above and beyond just reading books. There are other ways to connect and read. If they love video games and that's what they're playing, many video games nowadays are actually very text heavy. So they have to be able to read to play. And so that's also a valuable way that they are connecting to text and reading as well. So.
And lastly, to finish off my thought, so thank you so much, Ed. Using that as a springboard, like, so they don't have to only stay in that area of the thing that they're passionate about, but using that interest, the searching, writing reviews on whatever it is they're interested in, but using that as a springboard into other areas of reading and writing, I think is a great starting point, starting from the interest and then springboarding out, just paying attention to them.
If I can add to, when you think about reading looks very differently for a child that's 3, 4, 5 years old compared to a child that's 11 or 12. And we call that the continuum of reading. So you have to really honor if a child is holding a book and pretending that they're reading, that's still reading behaviors. In our Ontario kindergarten curriculum, they talk about demonstrating literacy behaviors. They don't expect a child to be able to read right away at the age of 4 or 5 years old. So look for literacy behaviors that the children are demonstrating and praise them. Say, I really saw how you were reading and saying those words and even making up your own story. Remember, that in itself is still reading. And so I wanted back to the motivation piece. Be sure that you recognize that and commend the children when you see them engaging in reading behaviors.
And if I can, Regine, add one more thing too. I had an experience today with a reader who, told me that they don't enjoy reading at all. And then was telling me all these facts about things. And when I asked, well, how did you learn those? The reader responded with that they looked them all up on Google. And so I think too, sometimes really, we need to think about when we say my child doesn't read, to Dexter's point, there's so many places and spaces, and I think everybody's touching on that we can read and we can read from, and really honoring the diversity of those spaces for reading. So what I heard from this person was that they understood in school it to be, I have to read from a hard book, like a physical book. And what I heard was tons of facts and reading that had come from Google searches about things they were interested in. And so, that would be my next point too, would be to keep trying to pursue those interests and that research interest and that knowledge and fact interest.
We have a question also in the Q&A. Somebody saying, my son loves to make up his own story to read. How can I help him to read books?
Do you want to try that, Kamisha? Oh, or Dexter?
I mean, I got really excited. I mean, making up stories. That's fabulous. And so I think it's about figuring out how you support them in recording those stories and writing the stories down, writing their ideas down, and drawing corresponding pictures for the story that they've created. But I would really focus on getting those ideas out and onto paper. Out orally is fine as well. Taking it a step further by getting it down on paper would be great. And then I think Dexter mentioned this, they can reread the story that they created. They can read the story that they created to family and friends. So there's so many things that you can do with that, but I would go with that energy. If they are excited about writing, then spend time writing stories with them. Yeah.
And I would add to, so that's beautiful. So for that parent, your child is an author. Your child is already an author. So it's really harnessing that, and the process of editing, reviewing, creating, and building upon the story, you're using all the strategies needed for reading. So they're actually using the reading strategies. But if you wanted to build on that, I would think of thinking about other child authors that are around their age. So can you find other authors that like are writing like you, and like find their work and think about reading some of those pieces and seeing what they're writing compared to them, and see how it might spark other ideas for them to add and write and create more. So that would be a good way to springboard them to reading other pieces of information beyond what they're writing, while still continuing to write on their own too.
Thank you, Dexter. I'm going to build on your response, and it's a question that came in early regarding understanding grammar and how important spelling is to reading, spelling and grammar. Dagny, did you want to respond to that?
Sorry, can you repeat back the first part?
So how important is spelling and grammar in understanding and having good reading skills?
Sure. So I would say, it's a skill that develops, like I think we've touched on a few times, that, the spelling and things comes with as I can speak things and I start trying to write them, depending where somebody's at in their, I understand words and the sounds of how we do hear what we read and put it into print. There's a big range of how that develops. And I think what's important to know is that the most important thing is for readers and writers to start getting down the sounds they hear and building off of what they are doing well. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add on to that.
Okay, so I have another question here. Let's see if I can formulate it. My child's a good reader. How do I continue to challenge them with reading and comprehension skills? Let's go to Kamisha or Dexter or Janice. Let's see who's looking up. We'll start with Kamisha.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Sure. So their child's a good reader. I actually minimized the question, so I'm going to do it off the top of my head. Their child's a good reader. How do they encourage to challenge them in their reading, and how are they? I know you spoke about comprehension, but how do we know that they're comprehending while they're being challenged?
How do we know that they're comprehending while they're being challenged? I would say
right. So there's two questions really.
Well, so
sorry.
For the comprehension piece, it's just really about while you're reading. If this is something that you're reading along with your child, and the only way for you to know whether they're comprehending what they're reading is if you're reading along with them, and it's asking questions as you go along. and then setting them up really well to be able to comprehend the book. I think this is something that Dexter and several others have touched on, but really having conversations about the book prior to reading to really set them up and set the context is going to help to ensure that they're understanding what they're reading and asking questions as you go along. Dexter, do you want to build there, or Janice or Dagny?
I think we have an extension of this question a little bit in the Q&A. It says how to encourage critical thinking, analysis about books, stories that they're reading. So I think it's almost the same, like a different variation of the same question.
And so that's what I was going to take it to next, is the critical thinking piece. So when you select books, again, it's okay to read those books that are just too easy for the children, or just something that they don't have to do much thinking about. But I would say ensure that they're also reading content that challenges them. And the way that you can do that is by asking them questions after they read a book. We know that children have an early sense of what's fair and what's not fair, as early as 12 months old. So reading a book and then asking them, what do you think of the actions of the character? Did what they do was fair? Who was harmed? Getting children to disrupt injustices that they may see in certain storylines. So for example, I have a 5-year-old, and we recently read, we read The Three Little Pigs. And I pulled out my collection of the true story of the Three Little Pigs. And then she was so excited to hear the wolf's version of the story. And I was able to then ask her, so who do you believe? And why? Do you think the pigs are telling the truth, or do you think the wolf is? And so I think that's a simple example of a JK way of doing it. But once you get to older grades, again, really dissecting the characters and their actions, why they are behaving the way they are, why do you think they're acting the way they are? And also think about cause and effect. So because a character acted a certain way, what then happened? What was the outcome? The other thing is, as you get into older grades, looking at newspaper articles, looking at, and I actually will not just say older grades, but all grades, looking at current events, things that are happening and impacting our society and our community, and getting children to really say how they feel about this, because we have to let them know that they have opinions and a voice as early as, birth for them, right? So now try to express that, connecting back to what Dexter said, the oral language piece. So you've read something, now tell me about it. Help me understand this, and what are your thoughts about it? And that's where the critical thinking piece is. We're not always accepting what we read at face value. To be a critical thinker is looking at the content and really giving your opinion about whether you agree or disagree, and then justifying that. So I agree because, and I don't agree because. So getting children to voice that to you.
And if I could add to, just one thing I was thinking as Janice was talking is also some things you might do with a story, if it's a shorter story, or even if your child, to build on the oral language part, is telling you about something that they did or something that happened. So you can support their thinking and their criticality in that by asking them like, oh, so what do you think might happen if, or what could you change it to? Like, so asking them to kind of think through a change or another way, whether it be from a book or even in something that actually happened to them. Because I think an important piece too is we're talking about reading, yes, but to Dexter's point on that oral language, all the time when we're talking with kids, we're building skills that transfer to reading. So any conversation in oral language opportunities help, and are spaces where we're also supporting the development of our children as readers.
And the only thing that I would add, it kind of goes into the past question that we answered, but I think it's important here too. It's the piece around letting sometimes, the school and the teachers may not know your child's interests or their strengths, right? If they love to read, I think Dagny, you were talking about the student, that reader who did all the research and did everything and found so many things online, right? They might not have opportunities or enough opportunities to do that at school. That's something that student is very strong with. But if you as the parent can communicate that to the teacher, to the school, then we'll be able to know, like, oh, this is something that we didn't notice about this student. I'm going to try to now provide more opportunities to use that strength as a way, as a springboard into other experiences for them at school. So I just wanted to highlight the importance of all of the great things that you already do at home, noticing it and naming it by communicating it to us at the school, because we might not always know some of the strengths that you have at home. And it's just like we always should communicate with you at school, at home, the things that we notice that they're doing and that they're strong with at school. That constant dialogue will help both school and home to support your child.
Okay, and we have a question here in the Q&A as well. My son is in SK. His reading is good, but he struggles with writing the same words he reads.
Okay, and before we answer that question, we have about 5 more minutes, and we will be giving away prizes, but we'll do that off camera. And also, Peter and Norbert might be saying some closing remarks, and you will also get a copy of this video. And if I'm incorrect, Alex, you can jump in anytime. So sorry, Hagar, can you please repeat that question?
Sure. So since these are the last questions, I'll say the last 2 questions and maybe you can answer them in those few minutes. So my son is in SK. His reading is good, but he struggles with writing the same words he reads. And the last question is, my child likes to make comics. Do I, choice number 1, motivate him or her to make more detailed books? Or choice number 2, motivate him or her to keep on going?
Anyone want to take that?
I say choice 3, both. I think you should be able to do both. Like, still motivate them to continue writing the books, but again, if you find spaces and opportunities for a different day for them to try something different, that's good too. So I don't think it has to be either or, it can be and.
Yeah, depending on the age of the child, like I want to share some community resources. So there is an organization called Story Planet, and I'll put them in the chat as well. So for parents that have kids that are interested in writing stories, Story Planet is offering free workshops throughout the summer. So I will share that with you, but it's like looking for opportunities for them to continue to write the stories that they want to, by connecting them to programs that exist in the community. There's Story Planet, the Reading Partnership also has a program where kids get to write stories and we publish them in anthologies. And so, I really want to push that there are community resources that exist that parents and families can and should be connecting to, that will help to also build your child's literacy skills. So I'll put those websites and links in the chat.
Thank you. And there's the question about the SK's child who struggles with writing the same words he reads.
I can help with that one. So reading and writing will not develop at the same pace, but know that reading will support writing and writing will support reading. So you continue doing both of them. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to, when you're doing writing, I'm picturing writing words in isolation. One thing I would recommend is ensuring that the words are seen in a text. So if I sat down and I wrote the word them over and over, I don't understand what them means. The research, the actual early years research states that when children learn words in isolation, they don't retain it. So they have to learn the words within the context of the book. So what would be a better strategy is pulling out a sentence from the book rather than just the word, and maybe writing out the sentence and doing a cut up sentence. So cutting up the sentence and having the child compose the sentence again. Even though you're focusing on the child learning the word them, the child is still using the word them, but seeing it in the text. If the child just writes the word by itself, the research says they will not retain it as much as they would if they learned it in context of the book that they're reading. So don't worry if they are unable to regurgitate or write that word from the book. It'll come. The more practice you get with reading, the better the children will become at writing, because they're seeing the words in a continuous text, meaning it's in a story. If it's just by itself, they will not. One of the main reasons why spelling lists per se does not necessarily transfer into children being able to read or write properly. I know we learn that way and we seem okay, but when we memorize spelling lists, it doesn't work for every child because they don't really know what the word means. But when they see the word in the book or the story, they then say, oh, that's what that word means. It gives them context.
And I would just like to add, I agree everything Janice said. If your child can read it and they have read it, then refer back to, like, pull up that exact same book that they read and say, okay, can you read this page again? Oh, what word is that you just said? Oh, this is the word you're trying to spell. Okay, let's write it down. So that's another way that you can do that.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you, parents and caregivers, for being here. I'm going to call on Peter Chang, Superintendent, and then Norbert to do some closing remarks. And please don't go yet, because then Sean will come on as well.
Thank you so very much, Regine, and thank you for this opportunity just to bring some closing words to this wonderfully exciting hour. For those of you who are on the webinar, you may or may not be able to see the chats that are happening among the participants, but I'll let you know that they would be happy to stay longer and discuss literacy, because there certainly is a love for literacy among all the participants. So it's really great to see. I'd like to begin, first of all, by thanking each and every one of the panelists, Dexter, Dagny, Kamisha, Janice, for really just bringing their expertise and love for reading and writing and oral language to all of our participants today. And of course, many thanks to Regine and Sean and Hagar for facilitating this wonderful event. For those of you who are listening, parents and caregivers and anyone else, folks, we're so fortunate that we're going to have 2 more sessions like this. So please know that you're more than welcome to continue doing what you're doing, asking the questions. And speaking of questions, I got to tell you, I almost feel like the panelists fed the questions, because they were so well prepared in answering them and just giving their such deep insights on this. But I know that's not the case, but it really reflects the depth and expertise that is certainly with our panelists today. And I look forward to what the next 2 weeks will be like. I just wanted to share with all of you how the foundations of success starts with exactly what we discussed today. And as a parent of 2 kids, much older than many of the panelists' children who are here today, I'll tell you that despite all the mistakes that we make along the way as parents, caregivers, and educators, what's really important, and I think, and we've heard it repeated a few times, is that we let the learners lead by their curiosity, their inquisitiveness, and just really their own desires. And by that, we're going to get their interests to really lead where they want to take us for the next little while. And it's that, although that hasn't changed over decades and generations, I think it's what's becoming very concrete now is that it is such a foundational piece with literacy. So I learned today about window and mirror text. So I haven't obviously been in a classroom for the last little while. So thank you for teaching me that. I continue to be a learner, and I think it's also what's emphasized is that in preparing our students for the 21st century, the focus on the critical competence of our learners is such an important piece too. So just want to really reiterate how thankful I am for being here and being part of this wonderful group. And I just want to, I'll pass it on to Norbert for his final closing comments too. But to all of the audience, looking forward to seeing you next week. Tell your friends to join us. And well, I think next week is numeracy, right, Regine? Yes, she's giving me a thumbs up. So
yes.
And everybody who's watching, again, you're going to realize that there are lots of connections between literacy and numeracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. You said a lot, and then a lot of the thoughts and ideas. Thanking everyone for the wonderful work putting this together, and we certainly appreciate it. Personally, from my experiences when I was part of the board's Read to Succeed program, many of the ideas, the thoughts and suggestions on this panel are the ones that are always tried and true. But one of the things I think we also have to continue to remember is the partnership between families and school and teachers and students in ensuring that we're there all to provide that network of support for our students. So, and to give the students voice and options. And it might be comic books, it might be newspaper, it might be Google, it might be whatever interests the child, but engaging them in reading and writing and learning and working as a partnership with everybody involved as caring adults to support the student success. And by being here on this panel, that's part of the work. And as Peter said, you're invited to come out for the other two as well in the upcoming weeks. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next week.
And Sean, it's on to you.
Okay, so just to close up a little bit, we've got some exciting activities to finish off. We're going to do a draw, but just before that, I'm going to share with you some of the links, because I don't think the attendees were able to see the links that were talked about and shared by the panelists. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so panelists, please jump in if there's anything that's not here as far as descriptors for the links. Sorry. And what we'll do probably is I will send this out to all of the attendees so that you have it. So there's a TPL, Dial a Story, the National Film Board, the Story Planet, and the Reading Partnership links that were talked about and discussed and shared by the panelists. And if there's anything else, panelists, please share with me, as I will, as I said, be sending an email out to all of today's attendees.